it's not a matter of how long you're here, but it's a matter of what you do while you're here. So it was June 9th of 2006. And I'm up in the morning doing my morning ritual, and Hal Elrod will teach you how to do this to set your day right. But then the phone rings, and it's my home phone. I don't even know my home phone number. So I didn't even answer it the first time around. And we don't have an answering machine or anything, those old school things, right? It just kept ringing. But then the second time it started ringing, I picked it up. And it was my business partner, Mike, and he said, hey, you know what? The airplane left St. George last night with Ray and Les, our partners, and no one's heard from him since. So I turn on the news, and it had confirmed that the plane had crashed into Utah Lake. And so it was a pretty jarring way to start your day, and I immediately started thinking, okay, what can I do to create some value? So I headed down to one of the widows' house and started spending time with them. And you know, in the moment that happened, I thought, I have to preserve their legacy. I have to continue on what we've started. And I started to live my life differently than before, but not necessarily in a good way. I mean, I started taking on everything. We had 42 employees. We wanted to keep all of those. I kept doing the radio show that I was supposed to do with Les, who had died in the plane crash. I was just doing everything I could. So I'd get up at 5 in the morning, and then I would leave, and then it would be late at night, and I'd finally come home, and I was going to one of our satellite offices, which was an hour drive. And so over the next 4 months from the time my partners died, I gained 22 pounds, and I couldn't even make simple decisions. I remember being double booked one day and having an assistant say, what do you want to do about that? And I was like, you know, I was just exhausted. And then Thanksgiving came, and so we got in the car, and it was my wife and my 1-year-old son, and we started driving to this little coal mining town called Price, Utah. And you know what, we have like our best times on these drives usually though, because we go through this beautiful canyon, Provo Canyon, or you know, down through Spanish Fork Canyon. It's like all these trees, and we had one of our great conversations. My wife's telling me, you know, that I was an extraordinary businessman. I loved hearing that. You know, she's telling me like, I'm an extraordinary speaker. Okay, she's my wife, so she could say that. You can judge later, right? But all these kind of things, extraordinary, and I was feeling really good. But then she looked back at my son, and then she looked back at me, and she says, but you're just an ordinary husband and father. You ever had a moment like that? See, for me in that moment, it wasn't about getting defensive. It wasn't about, you know, justifying anything. I'd realized that I had lost like a certain passion for life, what Philip talked about. I had lost kind of my way in the name of trying to preserve someone else's legacy. And so, what to do about that? Well, the first thing is I actually spent less time in my business over the next period of time. I started spending more time at home. I started spending time with my family. And before this, I didn't really believe you could have it all. I'd heard plenty of motivational speakers say that you could have it all, but I didn't really believe balance is possible, and I still don't think balance is the answer, but I think depth and presence is. And so I started having moments of depth. I started to turn certain things off. I started telling people, hey, you know what, I'm not going to be available all hours of the day. I'm actually not going to be answering my phone. So what can you do to figure these things out on your own so I can get back into taking care of my life and my family so I could show up better? And I started to think, how can I be an extraordinary husband? Because, you know, I was ordinary with my health and gaining weight, and I was ordinary as a husband and father. And so what I did was I called the 3 couples that I knew that had the very best marriage in the world, the people that I respected most. They were older than I was, they'd been married longer, but they had this like love affair with their spouses. Like it was just this like amazing experience. And so I said, why don't we all get together? And I invited myself and my wife into John Butcher's home because he had a really cool, you know, great place, and he had a penthouse in Chicago. So we just invited ourselves on over. And I said, hey, what I would love to do is have you be a mentor to me to get to that next level. And so what we decided to do that was very unique is we said, okay, who are we going to be friends with in our life, and who are we going to be friendly with? So that's the question to ask. Friends are people that you invite into your life, because my wife used to be in this study club, and when she was 8 months pregnant with our second son, I remember I was in Chicago at Strategic Coach. She calls me up and she's like hysterically crying and all this, and I'm wondering if anything's wrong with the baby, but I'm also thinking maybe it's a little bit of a hormonal issue, wasn't quite sure. And so I finally got out of her what was going on, and she says, well, my book club, I didn't go because I wasn't feeling well, but they reviewed Killing Sacred Cows. That's this New York Times bestseller that I wrote. And she goes, and they hated it. They destroyed it. And I was like, well, thank God. They're the most socialistic group I've ever seen. These are a bunch of people that I don't really want to spending a lot of time with anyway, right? So what we chose to do was start to be friendly with people, especially those people that were going through a divorce or that had venom towards their relationship. For 6 months, we said no to all their invitations, and we started to invite the people that had the best relationships or that were the best examples of being a father or anything like that. That's what we started to spend our time doing. And then we asked these people that were doing great things in these areas, what's your secret? What are the things? And we looked for the common denominators. And what we found in marriage was, number one, they put each other first. You know, we have a son, but at the time, he was going through a situation where he had auditory processing, he was in social groups, it was just like massive stress, so he was being put first, and so my wife wasn't really convinced about putting me first that it was gonna pay off. I didn't have long hair back then, I weighed 22 pounds more, so she wasn't 100% sure, right? So, and she's here, by the way, in the back, so like anything I say, you can validate. Is he telling the truth, or is he, is this a stage thing? But Carrie, will you just, raise your hand so they know she is? So it's my amazing wife, Carrie, and she's here supporting me today. So, so friends are ones that you invite, people that you're friendly with. I didn't want to have like a big altercation, but I just started saying no, and I stopped inviting them into my life, and I started inviting a better situation. I looked at the common denominators, the people that we're hanging out with that had the best marriages, and the common denominators were they put each other first, and number two, they treated themselves as their greatest asset. See, my wife was a domestic engineer at the time, had kind of retired from teaching and taking care of the kids, but felt guilty if we had a nanny. But these couples had a nanny because they started to, we wanted to have date nights. We wanted to have our time together. We wanted her to be able to rest and not just be constantly around taking care of the kids and then all of a sudden becoming tired and then all of a sudden resenting everything, right? Because never getting enough rest, never having time for themselves, never enjoying life along the way. And I don't really believe in this concept of retirement where you defer your entire life so that one day, someday, you finally get to enjoy life. I believe in retiring from the things that you hate, building a business and a life that you love, and doing things along the way that improve and are part of your lifestyle. So the next thing is, what's your scorecard? What's your scorecard? In my 20s, my scorecard was make as much money and have as much money as possible. That's what success meant to me. What does success mean to you? What makes it important? What's your scorecard? Like, if it's all just about having more, here's the problem. Someone always has more. Karush and I were talking about this. So there's always someone you could find that has more. But what if your success card, what if your scorecard was about having an extraordinary relationship? And so I think there's things that happen within our businesses or areas of our life where we're all extraordinarily successful, just like what my wife was saying on the drive. But then if we were to compare or look at those areas where we don't have extraordinary success, whether that's your health or your spirituality or your relationships or your parenting or whatever that is, where we could look at that hidden formula in our own life and say, what is it that I'm doing in the areas where I'm killing it, where I'm just doing so great, that if I could just take and apply to these other areas, would get better results. So we see, the couples retreat up here. Well, that's one thing I decided, is I was gonna start paying for things so that I would pay attention to them. In my business, I always had mentors. I was always part of great groups. But what about in my marriage? What about in my health? So I started paying for those things. I started buying books and reading things in those areas because I found when I was reading book, I was putting the right attention towards it, but I wasn't reading anything in marriage before that time. And what I found is I had a vision for my business. In my business, the vision was, I want to get 1 million entrepreneurs to economic independence by January 1st, 2020. I think that that's a very clear vision. I'm very compelled by it. But if you had asked me my vision back in those days of my marriage, it'd be like, well, I want to be a good husband. What does that mean? Well, I decided the vision was going to be a premier romantic and to be an extraordinary husband. That's my vision, my marriage. So I started doing things that romantic people do. And by the way, if you're not a romantic person, you can outsource that to Bluefish. Like Steve Sims, I called him once. I was like, hey, I want to do something really cool. So we went to LA, my wife and I. He got us a 1955 Porsche Roadster. He rented out Red O Restaurant with all of the executive staff, with just her and I, where we got to cook through the whole day. So you don't even have to be great at this, but you can get best practices from other people in the room. I'm reading through this entire event, right? Like all the questions you've answered. You're incredibly creative in so many areas of life. You can take that same creativeness and apply it to whatever other area of your life that you want to improve, whether that's your marriage, whether that is even your business, whether that's parenting. But see, we started to do these regular date nights, and I captured in my OmniFocus app and my Evernote like ideas when I would hear good date night ideas. I subscribed to other apps that would put, hey, here's the concerts that are coming into town, or here's things that we could do. We love to slow dance. There's not a lot of slow dancing anymore. We go to weddings and it's like all hip hop and even like old school hip hop, which is cool and fun. But so I hired a quartet for our anniversary once, right? Because that's what a premier romantic would do, because I had a vision for it now where I didn't have that in the past. And I was just talking to John Bowen, because one of the things that we began to do, because I did this in my business, is have a weekly meeting where we actually had an agenda. Because a lot of times if you have kids or you have a business, it's hard sometimes because that's pulling you in so many different directions, and maybe when you come home at night, you're a little bit tired or even exhausted. What if instead of being tired and exhausted, you had a meeting during the week with your significant other and said, okay, how am I doing on a scale of 1 to 10? Well, let's check in. I mean, I like to have pulse reports in my business so I can have trend management and say, where's our numbers? What do we need to be looking at? Why not have that in my marriage? Do that little check-in. And if you're a 7, I'm like, oh crap, what's going on? What would it take to get from a 7 to a 10 would be the next question. And it's like, hey, it'd be turning off technology at night. So we started to create structure so we could have a better life, so that we can enjoy it along the way. So it wasn't about someday, one day, when we have a certain amount of money. And part of those became, okay, number 1, we're going to travel 14 days internationally without the kids. They can miss us. We'll come back to them. They'll be okay. We got a good support network. Number 2, I'm going to be home at 6 p.m. every night. When I'm home, that means the phone's turned off. It means the computer's put away so that I could be present and we could spend time together. And number 3, if I'm gone for more than 4 days in any given month, I'm going to take a day off during the week that we could spend some time together and reconnect. And what happened was, no longer when I was on a trip was I worried about what was going on at home. I could be present. I could have my phone off when I'm at an event. I'm not having to call her every few minutes, and she's not frustrated, which happened in the past, right? And then when I'm at home, I'm not worried about everything here because I know that that's my rules. I've got some boundaries. And so what is it that you can create in your life that way? All right? So the first thing, find those people in your life that edify any area that you want to improve. Become friends with them. Invite them. And become friendly, just like they do at Mastermind Talks, friendly with people who don't fit the culture, which means they don't get to come the next time, right? So then after that, look and say, what's your vision? What's your vision for those areas of your life? If you lack vision in that area of your life, how do you know what to get? Fuzzy targets don't get hit. Vision is the rarest commodity in the world, and when we have vision, then value follows that vision. Our life follows that vision, so create that compelling vision for yourself. And then the other question is, when it comes to legacy, because I was living someone else's legacy instead of owning my own, and fortunately when I was given that kind of hard truth in that moment of truth, I was able to then say, okay, then what is my legacy going to be? And at that time, I look at my legacy as something I live, and I still look at it that way, but I also started to look at, like, when Tucker talked about book in a box, one of the books that everyone in the room could write is a book about your life that what if your great-great-grandkids knew who you were, what you stood for? That's what the Rockefellers have done in their method, where the Vanderbilts didn't. So there is no more wealth that's being transferred into the Vanderbilt family, but the Rockefellers actually have a set of ideals and values, and that they teach each other, and they have the structure. So I've created a trust where the first, I know it's a little bit big, but 58 pages of the trust is in my wife and I's language, right? It's our conversation that we'd want our family to know so that our values can be passed on and that we can preserve the money and we can have like a family bank and create incentives. And I actually have a board of people that each represent a different aspect of what would be most important for me to teach my kids as I plan to if I'm around, but that if I'm not, that legacy could be preserved, protected, and perpetuated. So, friends versus friendly, having a vision, creating some structure and some rules, finding a love relationship and investing in it, going all in, Kevin Thompson saw us last night. He goes, man, I loved watching you and your wife interact. He says, it inspired me and I called my wife. That's what I hope to do. I hope that you can say, what would it take to go from ordinary in any area of your life, create more depth, and get to the level extraordinary? Because one thing is, a month before my partners died in that plane crash, Les pulled me aside. And he said, you know what? I can't imagine life being any better. I love my life. And even though he died at the age of 35, it left me with a lot of comfort. And the other thing is, when we put a celebration on called the Legacy Event, where 2,000 people came to celebrate the lives of my partners, we showed a clip of a video where Les closed by saying, it's not a matter of how long you're here, but it's a matter of what you do while you're here. So, what matters to you? What's your legacy? Where can you take it to the next level and be extraordinary? I invite you to do so, because I know that if you do, it'll be rich and rewarding. And just like Benjamin Franklin says, wealth is not just the man that has it, but it's the man that lives it. So, live wealthy.